Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our presentation titled Engaged Dads, Healthy Families, Consequences of Father Absence and Strategies for Promoting Engagement. For those of you who I have not met, my name is Hannah Hansen, and I am the Men's Health Coordinator at the newly North Dakota Department of Health and Human Services. Today's webinar is the second in a series about men's health, with the first event being held last June on the topic of the mental health crisis in men. We welcome back our same presenter, Jason Vitello, for what will be, I'm sure, another captivating presentation. Jason is a public health practitioner, speaker, consultant, educator, and activist. He is committed to the advancement of health, equity, and healing in our communities and in the systems that serve them. Formerly, Jason was a social worker and therapist who provided advocacy, mentorship, case management, and clinical services. And it should be noted that before he was ever a provider of human services or family assistance, he was a recipient of them. His ultimate interest is in collective liberation and the betterment of the human condition through fierce compassion, collaboration across struggles, the peaceful obliteration of structural inequalities, and comprehensive paradigm transformation. Our webinar today is titled Engaged Dads, Healthy Families, and as I said, we will cover the consequences of father absence and highlight strategies to promote engagement. Just a couple housekeeping items before I turn it over to Jason. This event is approved for CEU credit for social workers and nurses. I will be sending out a short survey at the end of the event for everyone to fill out, and there is a question in the survey to indicate whether or not you're seeking CEU credit and how to input your information, and then a certificate will automatically be emailed to you. There is a question and answer box on your screen, so please use that to pose any questions for Jason that come up during the presentation. And lastly, this is being recorded, and I will make sure to make it available for those who cannot stay for the full duration. So that's everything I have, and Jason, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's great to be back. Wow, it's flown by. I can't believe it was June the last time we were together. Yeah, engaged dads, healthy families, consequences of father absence and strategies for promoting engagement is our topic today. I'd like to open with a question for you to reflect on. Quietly to yourself.
Jason, looks like you might be muted.
Yeah, I think you muted your microphone, Jason.
Let's try that again. I think it muted me when I went to share. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
All right, sorry about that. Yeah, so reflect on this following question. Who are you because of your father? And I believe that one could walk into virtually any room and ask that question, and that everyone in that room would have a meaningful answer, even if they did not have an active father in their life. So last time I was here, I discussed some of the mental health challenges experienced by men, including disproportionately higher rates of suicide, substance use, addiction, incarceration, violence, and victimization. I discussed stigma and aspects of male socialization, which serve as barriers to positive men's mental health and to help-seeking behavior. And today I'll be presenting what I believe is also a significant social problem with aversive impacts, not just upon men and fathers, but upon women, children, families, and our society at large. I'll also be discussing the importance of father engagement as a solution and strategies to achieve father engagement. Please keep in mind when I use the term father, that term can usually refers to a biological father, but can also refer to a social, legal father, or really any man who plays a significant role in the raising of a child. They may or may not live in the same household from one or more of their kids. I also want to acknowledge that children can and do thrive in diverse familial environments, whether that be in single mother households or in same-sex couples. This presentation is not meant to diminish that fact at all, but I do intend to make the case that fathers bring very, very meaningful, unique, and healthy contributions to the lives of their children, and that far too many children never benefit from these contributions. About 18.4 million children, to be precise, in the United States. That's 1 in 4 children who do not live with a biological step or adoptive father in their home. That's enough to fill New York City twice or Los Angeles 4 times over. There are 7 million dads who are absent from the life of all of their minor children. I also want to acknowledge, thanks to information that Hannah sent me, that according to 2013 census data, North Dakota is one of the 3 states with the lowest rates of father absence. So y'all are doing something right here. But as I stated in my last presentation, data is not just the numbers, right? It's the narrative. It's important that we know the story, the full story behind the data that we're looking at. And when people speak about father absence or fatherlessness or the fatherhood crisis in social and political discourse, it's usually in reference to the so-called deadbeat dad who needs to man up and pay his child support or take care of his kids. And while there are undoubtedly fathers who are disengaged from their children's lives of their own volition, this notion is very much a exaggerated social construct. Many fathers are impeded from being fully engaged in the lives of their children by external forces and factors, such as mass incarceration, which I touched on during the last presentation. America has the highest rate of incarceration of any country in the world. That's according to the Population Reference Bureau, and 93% of its prisoners are men. 92% of parents in prison are fathers, and according to some estimates, about 70% of the men in prison are fathers. Other primary causal factors are out-of-wedlock births and divorce. Research aside, anecdotally, throughout my life, I work primarily in, academia and public health and social work now, but I kind of made my bones in more traditionally, fields more traditionally populated by men, right? And as a soldier, a bartender, a construction worker, and then more recently as a social worker working extensively with non-custodial fathers and a parenting class educator, I have encountered innumerable men who wanted nothing more than the opportunity to be responsible dads who were highly involved in the lives of their kids. And a long time ago, I was one such man myself. At the age of 17, I was in a pretty volatile high school romance. My girlfriend became pregnant, and she decided that she wanted to keep the baby, and I could not fathom the idea of having a child trying to make their way in the world without me. I think I attribute that to having a good and involved father of my own. We went old school with it. We got married, and I joined the military, and we had a pretty good run, all things considered. But given our youth and the mistakes that we made on both sides, I suppose it wasn't really a surprise when things went south. And she would ultimately decide to leave me and our 3-year-old son behind. And after several futile attempts to reconcile our marriage, I realized that it'd probably be more prudent to turn my attention to the welfare of our son, who was emotionally devastated by her abrupt departure. And I wanted to pursue primary physical custody, and even if it were only temporary. So I made an appointment with a family attorney for a free consultation, and I sat in the lobby nervously as the paralegal clicked away at her computer. During my time in the military, I had heard several horror stories and had known many men who had returned from a deployment to an empty home, and they suddenly had no access to their children. This was what was on my mind, and to make conversation, I cleared my throat and I asked the paralegal, just small talk, how long she had been working in this field in family court. 5 years, she answered while typing away. I said, how many custody cases have you seen? She said, oh God, at least 1,000. I swallowed hard after that and asked with hesitation, how many did the father win? And for the first time, she stopped typing and looked at me with almost like a conciliatory tone, said 2. And this did very little to alleviate my distress as I walked into the attorney's office. And he asked for my story, and I began to tell it a mile a minute. She's not in a stable place. She left 4 months ago and hasn't returned to see our son ever since. She might call him once every other week or so. I have no idea where she's living. I hear she's with some guy she met in a bar. She has no job, no means of supporting herself or her child. Doesn't have her own transportation, and so on and so on. And he took off his glasses and held up his hand, motioning for my silence. And he asked, may I be blunt, young man? And I said, yeah. He said, because I don't want to waste your time and I don't want you to waste mine, but is she, pardon me, he asked, is she a prostitute? I said, no. Is she addicted to drugs, and can you prove it? I said, no, I don't think so. Does she physically abuse your child or let anyone else physically abuse your child? And I said no. And his response was, I'm sorry, you really don't have a chance. Now, had I not been a mere E2 in the military, that conversation would have gone differently, I'm sure. But the point was driven home, right? As it would turn out, my ex-wife ultimately conceded that she was not in the best place to care for our son at that time. And she signed over physical custody to me without a contest. And that is not the case for many men or their children. I worked for an organization called Fatherhood Support Services. Our goal was to help non-custodial fathers in particular navigate any obstacles, be they emotional or structural, which impede them from becoming more fully engaged and involved in the lives of their children. I met a lot of men working with Fatherhood Support Services, including a man who for over a year was not able to see his kids for more than 4 hours a week, who had been told by their mother, I know you're a good dad. I know you love your kids, and I know they love you, but if I give you more time and overnight custody, I will get less child support. Or a man who had not seen his daughter at all for the past 2 years after innumerable allegations of child abuse and even sexual molestation by his ex-wife, all of which were deemed unfounded and unsubstantiated by social services and criminal investigators. Nevertheless, the man was forced to spend countless hours and several $1,000s to defend himself in court. As it turns out, the mother had started a webpage soliciting information from the masses on how to terminate the parental rights of her ex-husband by any means, presumably to punish him for his suspected infidelity. For a father who opened his own child support case to help provide for his son and months later had still not been permitted by his ex-wife to see him as she remarried and believed that the boy did not need two dads. Or a father who had his driver's license suspended and was facing jail time for falling behind on the $600 a month in child support he had been ordered to pay while he was unemployed and homeless. Unfortunately, these stories are not one in a million, but one of a million. Many fathers cannot afford the substantial time and money that it costs to struggle through the emotional and logistical gauntlet to rectify such situations. The men who choose to fight and engage the family court or human service system are often met with indifference or outright hostility. Karen Jenkins, the director of public child welfare initiatives at American Humane, asserts that as mothers are usually the custodial parents and primary caretakers, the child welfare system is conditioned to treat mom as the, quote, identified client, which often results in mother-centric bias practices and services. And then there's the family court system. At its worst, the divorce and child custody apparatus is a bona fide industry and an independent fiefdom with very little scrutiny or oversight. It employs hundreds of thousands of judges, magistrates, attorneys, social workers, case managers, mental health professionals, technicians, collection agents, and it consequently possesses an inherent interest in more divorce, more conflictual divorce, more restraining orders, more mental health evaluations, more mandatory classes and treatment programs, more supervised visitations, and inflated child support payments. And far too often, the hapless victim is a legally unimpeachable father who is presumed guilty, who can be evicted from his home, have his assets seized, his wages garnished, be forbidden from seeing his children, and assessed huge fees, and even face incarceration, very often without due process. A lot of the proceedings are held without his knowledge or presence, thereby eliminating his ability to defend himself. All of this affects fathers across demographics, but naturally lower income, men of color, and non-English speaking men are especially vulnerable. I want to be clear on something else. I'm not here to rail against divorce as a means of ending an unhappy or unhealthy, let alone toxic or harmful relationship. Some people don't need to be married to each other. And countless research, however, has demonstrated that divorce can be an especially traumatic experience for the children involved, and that two adults ending their marital relationship should never automatically entail an end to a parental relationship. I also want to point out here, when I'm talking about fathers and how fathers should be involved in the lives of their children, and fathers are additive and positive factors, I am not talking about fathers who have demonstrated actual abusive or neglectful behaviors, right? What I am saying is that fathers are no more inherently inclined to such behavior than mothers. So now that we've outlined the prevalence and the causal forces of fatherlessness, let's take a look at its costs, starting with the actual fiscal implications. This is from a 2011 study, which found that the government spends about $99.8 billion every year on anti-poverty programs to support father-absent homes. And this is a conservative estimate, which doesn't include federal benefit programs for communities, indirect costs related to poor outcomes of children from father-absent homes, long-term costs, and reduced tax income from lower-earning single-parent families. When people talk about fathers' rights or dadvocacy, I don't know if you've heard that before, but it can sound oppositional to women and mothers. But in actuality, mothers also suffer aversive impacts from father absence. Consider the following findings. Sleep, self-care, daily tasks are often ignored by moms to tend to the needs of their children. 45% of single moms must hold down more than one job to support their families. In most 49 states, the annual cost of childcare exceeds the cost of a college tuition. More than 1 in 3 single mother families lived in poverty in 2015. Right. Beyond that, the poverty rate for single women in 2011 was 40.9%, nearly 5 times that of married couples. 2/5 of single mother families are food insecure, 1/7 use food pantries, and 1/3 spend more than half their income on housing. All of this leaves less resources for higher education, savings, investments, recreational activity, and other opportunities to improve quality of life for themselves and their kids. Again, as can be expected, these numbers are higher for minority single mother homes. And contrary to popular belief, it's not that dads are not doing their part in paying child support. I also want to point out here, when we're talking about human behavior, variation is the norm. And I know in these presentations, I've painted in broad strokes. There's always exceptions. Wanted to note that as well. But according to the U.S. Census Bureau, fathers with visitation rights pay 79.1% of all child support. 44.5% of fathers who have no visitation rights still financially support their children. And 66% of all child support not paid by non-custodial fathers is due to the inability to pay. That's from the U.S. General Accounting Office report. But the implications of father absence are most salient within the lives of children, right? Children from father absent homes, 4 times greater risk of poverty, more likely to have behavioral problems, 2 times greater risk of infant mortality, more likely to go to prison, more likely to commit crime, 7 times more likely to become pregnant as a teenager, more likely to face abuse and neglect, more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol, twice as likely to drop out of school. Some more specific findings. Children from father-absent homes account for 63% those who die by suicide as youth, 71% pregnant teenagers, 90% of all homeless and runaway children, 70% of juveniles in state-operated criminal institutions, 85% of all children with behavioral health disorders, 80% of convicted rapists, 71% of all high school dropouts, 75% of all adolescent patients in substance use centers, and 85% of all youth sitting in prisons. Consider the research of Professor Craig Hard and Doctors Silverstein and Auerbach, who independently assert that negative outcomes for children correlate more strongly to fatherlessness than to any other variable, including poverty. Or Stephen Baskerville here, virtually every major social pathology has been linked to fatherlessness. Violent crime, drug and alcohol abuse, truancy, teen pregnancy, suicide, all correlate more strongly to fatherlessness than to any other single factor. He goes on, the majority of prisoners, juvenile detention inmates, high school dropouts, pregnant teenagers, adolescent murderers, and rapists all come from fatherless homes. It's important to note that many of these children grow up and have children of their own, which can perpetuate the same cycles. Fatherlessness is a societal and communal crisis that men and fathers cannot successfully overcome on their own. The solution to fatherlessness is father engagement, which is defined by the Department of Health and Human Services as the purposeful inclusion of fathers in programming with the goal of improving outcomes for fathers, children, and families. And just as fatherlessness has aversive impacts for mothers and children reap a host of benefits when fathers are engaged during pregnancy and in raising the kids. Let's start with a look at the benefits for mothers. Mothers who have fathers who are engaged during pregnancy and childcare are more likely to receive prenatal care, less likely to smoke during pregnancy, have healthier births, lower risk of postpartum stress, lower risk of postpartum depression, lower parenting stress, and more leisure time. Again, this is not necessarily a case that mothers and fathers must be together or must be married, as much as it is a case for father involvement and co-parenting. And just because two people might not share in a romantic or a marital relationship, it doesn't mean that they can't share in the responsibilities of raising children. And of course, there are several independent studies which have concluded that father engagement has a positive impact upon children in all facets of their development, from the physiological to the psychosocial. Children with involved fathers experience better outcomes throughout life in virtually every arena, including relational, economic, educational, and mental, emotional, and physical well-being. And fathers' effects on children's brain development. Thomas Reyes notes that brain-based father-child interactions stimulate neural interconnections that can play a central role in how the child learns, interprets information, and responds to his, her, or their environment and thrives. There are values traditionally promoted by fathers, such as justice, action, fairness, individualism, and autonomy. Healthy father involvement impacts the way women or young girls learn to interact with men, and models to boys healthy interaction with females and other boys. Our juvenile detention court systems and prison systems are filled with young men and men who never did learn that lesson. And other benefits of father engagement. Fathers and infants can be equally as attached as mothers and infants. When both parents are involved with the child, infants are attached to both parents from the beginning of life. I think I mentioned the last presentation I did, teaching parenting classes to fathers. When they learn the lesson that as a dad, their role can extend beyond being a provider, sending a check, can extend beyond being the giant playmate or discipliner, and that they too can be nurturing to their children. It's rewarding for me as an educator to see that understanding come into their realization, but ultimately very, very rewarding for them and ultimately for their children. And they go on to have richer and more meaningful relationships when they realize that their role is as critical as it is. Father involvement is related to positive child health outcomes in infants, such as improved weight gain in preterm infants and improved breastfeeding rates. Fathers who typically use an authoritative parenting, which is loving and with clear boundaries and expectations, leads to better emotional, academic, social, and behavioral outcomes for children. Children who feel like closeness to their father are twice as likely as those who do not enter college or find stable employment after high school. 75% less likely to have a teen birth, 80% less likely to spend time in jail, and half as likely to experience multiple depression symptoms. Fathers occupy a critical role in child development across the lifespan. The quality of the father-child relationship matters more than the specific amount of hours spent together, right? So even non-resident fathers can have positive effects on children's social and emotional well-being and their academic achievement and behavioral performance. High levels of father involvement are correlated with higher levels of sociability, confidence, and self-control in children. Children with involved fathers are less likely to act out in school or engage in risky behaviors in adolescence. Children with actively involved fathers are 43% more likely to earn A's in school and 33% less likely to repeat a grade than those without engaged dads. Father engagement reduces the frequency of behavioral problems in boys while also decreasing delinquency and economic disadvantage in low-income families. And it reduces psychological problems and rates of depression in young women. And I could go on and on and on. Again, there's an extensive body of research which demonstrates the profound benefits of father engagement. But despite an awakening to the need for father engagement, family research still focuses primarily on mothers and children. Healthcare systems frequently, albeit unwittingly, are not inclusive of dads, both during pregnancy and after birth during pediatric care. Think about most of the family service agencies, human service agencies, or family healthcare settings you've ever been to. You know, what kinds of colors or pictures are on the wall? What kinds of magazines are in the waiting areas? School records and files and family service organizations often have the child's name and the mother's name on the label and not the father's. Last year, I went to my youngest son's school to demand that my girlfriend's name be placed on the contact and distribution lists after they hadn't responded to me several times via email. And they said, "Sir, your name's not even on the list." And given these scenarios, fathers are likely to get the message that they are invisible or relevant to their children's welfare unless it involves financial support. Right? So take AMCHIP, the Association of Maternal and Child Health Programs, or WIC, right? Women, Infants, and Children. And what do dads get? Child support enforcement. So father engagement requires proactive intention, and perhaps the exemplary initiative striving toward this end is the National Fatherhood Initiative, which was founded in 1994. NFI is the nation's leading provider of research on father presence and father involvement, research and evidence-based fatherhood programs and resources, staff training, and father engagement planning services for human service organizations and practitioners. Their mission is to increase father involvement by equipping communities and human service organizations with the father engagement training programs and resources they need to be father inclusive. Their vision is that all communities and human service organizations are proactively father inclusive so that every child has an involved, responsible, and committed father in their lives. They have a lot of really great infographics. If you go to their site, you can download and print these. They share quite a few of the data that I did. A lot of organizations or agencies will have these prominently displayed in their offices. And they have several free resources. Guide to Mentoring Fathers, Fundraising for Father Programs. It's important to know, in terms of mentoring fathers, a lot of fathers internalize the same messages that were, that serve as barriers to father engagement, right? The idea that, and maybe a lot of them didn't have involved fathers for themselves, or maybe they are with partners or exes who didn't have engaged and involved fathers in their lives, who don't see or understand the value that a father brings. it's something that they need to learn as well. And again, having been a parenting class instructor to non-custodial fathers, watching them come to the realization that their involvement in the lives of their children matters and is highly consequential and highly meaningful, and their absence could have detrimental effects, can be a profound experience of learning for them. So sometimes fathers need that education and that mentoring and coaching to come to that realization, and then help kind of getting there, right? Help learning what an engaged and positively involved father-child relationship looks like. So measures of father-child relationship quality for fatherhood programs, creating effective and scalable local fatherhood programs and initiatives, ebook, Strong Fathers plus Strong Families. Plenty of free resources for you to peruse and implement. There are many messaging campaigns, such as the LA Fathers Program, featured in children's hospital systems and beyond. What makes you a man isn't the ability to conceive a child, it's having the courage to raise one. Raising a child means raising your game and developing your skills. The LA Fathers Program is a free resource to help 15 to 25-year-old dads find work and learn the parenting skills necessary to succeed. And it has a number. Very successful program in raising awareness to what I was just saying, right? The need, the importance of father engagement that not all fathers are aware of, especially within a society that reinforces their lack of value. This is from the U.S. Health and Human Services Early Childhood Learning and Knowledge Centers Birth to 5 Father Engagement Guide. This is a really useful guide that rests on the understanding that father engagement is not a one and done standalone program initiative. It represents a paradigm shift and a culture change, right? And ought to be integrated into all aspects of parent, family, and community work. Right? This is a systemic integration of multiple activities that comprehensively promote father engagement. Some of these are creating father-friendly environments, physical environments that are welcoming and comfortable, forming fathers groups, led by fathers that plan activities and build support networks, training staff to implement a parenting curriculum that develops the knowledge and skills of fathers. Right, so yeah, we internalize a lot of these messages, whether we are fathers, mothers, or frontline staff or leadership staff in health and human services or healthcare settings, including parents or fathers rather in parent-teacher conferences and home visits, designing recruitment materials that appeal to fathers, collaborating with community partners to align and reinforce strategies that respond to the strengths of fathers and their interests and their needs, finding out who is in the community already building these connections to fathers and doing this work, and not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but partnering with, connecting to, and coordinating. You know, we like to say that it takes a village to raise a healthy child, but I don't believe that our villages can be healthy if the men and the fathers are not. As I shared in this and in my last presentation, many of the men and fathers in this village of ours are not doing well. They're not thriving. A few years ago, I was speaking in Tulsa, Oklahoma on this very topic. And at the end, there was an older Black woman who raised her hand and stood up. She self-identified herself as a radical feminist going all the way back to the 1960s, and she was emotional. And she said, you know, for a very long time, myself and others were screaming at men and letting them know that they weren't wanted and they weren't needed. And I think maybe the pendulum has swung a little too far in the other direction. And it turns out that we do need our men and we do need our dads. And yeah, as it turns out, I think it's clear that children need their fathers, but also fathers need their children. The villages need their men, and the men need their villages. And if I could close with a story, I'm hoping that there's some time for questions and discussion at the end. But I mentioned that I was a single parent, teenage dad, and then a single dad by 21. And there was this thing that I would do with our kid when he was about 2. It would drive his mother crazy. Maybe that's why she left. Some of you dads will know what I'm talking about. I would hold him by the waist and I'd throw him into the air. And he would scream in terror. And then I'd catch him. And he would laugh with delight and joy. And then I'd throw him up into the air again. And he'd scream in terror. And then I'd catch him. And he would laugh in pure bliss. It was years later when I learned that this activity was actually healthy and that I was forming neurological pathways in his head and that he was learning a very, very important lesson. The world is a potentially dangerous place filled with a lot of uncertainty, and I'm safe. Uh-oh, it's happening again. I'm afraid, and I'm okay. You got to catch them every time. That's the trick. And over the next several years, there are many, many occasions where I very much felt up in the air as a young single dad. Unsure of how or where I would land, but there were people in my life, professionals, family, and loved ones, systems in place who were invested in my growth and in my humanity, and invested in making me understand that there was a place for me in the village. And in closing, if you could take a moment to think about some of the men and the fathers who might be up in the air a little bit, and consider doing the same for them. Thank you very much. I'd like to address anything in the chat or leave some time for questions or comments.
Thank you, Jason. As usual, totally blew it out of the water. I think I'm not alone when I say that I learned a lot, and I am really excited to put some of these strategies that you mentioned into action in my own work. So thank you again for sharing that.
Thank you.
And I want to remind people that you can ask questions in the Q&A function, which should be in that top toolbar on your screen. And while we wait for some questions to come in, I have a question for you, Jason.
Sure.
So understanding that the deadbeat, disengaged dad trope is often quite far from true. That dads really do want to be engaged in their child's lives, but may experience some structural or social barriers that may lead them to kind of feel disengaged or remove themselves from situations. I think particularly in healthcare settings, this is shown to be true. What strategies would you suggest, maybe from your own experience, working in a parenting class, to really reach dads who may feel that they're kind of left behind in this process? I think we have people from a wide variety of employment backgrounds. We have people from early childhood education. We have healthcare practitioners. So what would be some suggestions you would have?
Thank you. I think education, people just don't know. I think people in human services, in healthcare, a lot of mothers, fathers themselves, maybe most of all, don't understand the value that they can bring to the lives of their children. And I found that once they are aware of that, once they learn that actually their involvement matters and that their lack of involvement might actually be harmful. Like, they love their kids, right? And a lot of them kind of internalize the belief, they're fine without me, or they're better off without me. And then a lot of men and fathers really. So it's establishing that, letting them know that, and then not just them, but also mothers who might feel the same way, and professionals. Because like, mothers love their kids too. Fathers love their kids. The human services staff, they get into this work because they care about children and families. Once they come to the awareness and the realization of the positive impacts that father engagement brings and the aversive impacts from fatherlessness, it becomes critically important that that education is provided to everyone. And then once that education and awareness is there, then you start working on those barriers. A lot of those barriers are emotional. A lot of fathers, they might want to have loving, nurturing relationships with their kids, but they've never seen that modeled before, right? Not just fathers, but parents in general, right? So navigating those emotional or behavioral barriers, and then addressing the systemic and structural barriers through policy advocacy and so on.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good, important first step for a lot of us to receive that information and hopefully share it with our networks to make a change. It looks like no questions yet, but I have another one for you, if that's okay.
Sure.
So kind of tying back, you touched on it a little bit toward the end of your presentation about the mental health crisis in men. How do you see that kind of playing a role in fatherhood and fatherhood absence in particular? Where do you see those kind of connections?
So you're asking for me to say more about the connection between the male mental health crisis and father absence?
Yes.
Okay. So as I highlighted in our time together last time, we're living in the middle of some pretty significant economic and cultural shifts. We are there's a contemporary conception of masculinity these days, which is the marketplace man or the self-made man, in which a man is expected to be successful, to have money and status and power. And given a lot of these cultural and economic shifts, and a lot of long overdue and rightful gains made by people from systemically excluded communities, such as BIPOC individuals and women, a lot of men are experiencing these gains as losses and are feeling a sense of displacement. There's a lot of resentment around the inability to access a lot of these proofs or evidence of what a man is supposed to be. And this creates a sense of disconnection from the village, right? Also, as I pointed out, a lot of men experience a type of socialization early in life where they are expected to adhere to a very, very rigid definition of what it means to be a man, which entails manning up in the face of any adversity, emotional or otherwise, and not having emotional fluency, right? Or literacy, which is the ability to understand, to experience and express uncomfortable feelings in a healthy way. And a lot of men end up in situations where they're not able to experience or express these uncomfortable feelings. They instead learn to suppress or distract from them, often through problematic behaviors or illicit substances. Can put a great strain on their ability to have healthy relationships with themselves, but also with partners, with their children. And as I've stated, a lot of men only ever receive mental health treatment or substance use treatment after being arrested or incarcerated for a violent crime or a substance use related crime. And I think a lot of this is down to, I think within public health, for instance, we do a good job looking at the root causes, but we could do better looking at the root causes of the root causes and going deeper, because I think these are deep existential problems that men are experiencing, which have severe implications for them and for everyone else. And ultimately, when we talk about fighting against oppression, fighting against racism, fighting against injustice, it's important to remember what it is we're actually fighting for. We know what we want to dismantle, but what are we trying to build? And ultimately, what we're talking about here is belonging, right? Creating a world where we all do better when we all do better, where none of us are well until we all are. And everyone feels like they belong in the village and has a role. And I think a lot of men and dads for a very long time have felt a diminished sense of purpose. And they're feeling like there's not a lot of meaning. So they're attaching their time and energies to, all of us want our lives to mean something, right? And I think if we can redirect some of that desire into pro-social, pro-family, pro-children avenues, we can start seeing a lot of the changes that we wish to see, not just in the lives of men and fathers, but in our families and in our communities and in society at large.
Great. Thank you for that. We do have a question that came in, but before I read that, I just want to remind everyone that I put the link to the survey in the chat. If you are looking for CEU credit, you definitely have to fill out this survey. But if you are not, I would still appreciate you filling it out just to get sort of a review of how we're doing and are there future topics that people would be interested in learning about. So our question that came in from Cooper Cody is, any advice for dads that didn't get to do the baby trust fall exercise and want to build that feeling that they are a safe place for their child in elementary school or adolescence?
That's a great question. I think time and connection and just being you as a dad, and really kind of that reframe that like even a dad can be a nurturing presence and a trusted presence. I'll never forget when I used to teach parenting classes to groups of men. There were always guys in there that would be sitting in there with their arms folded, right? Who believed Right, and it was the nurturing parenting program, which taught a nurturing approach to parenting, not just discipline and punitive motivators for, the idea is like you don't want to control your child. You don't want to make your child obedient. You don't want to teach them to submit to someone bigger and stronger than them, because, the implications of that could be pretty problematic, right? But rather, you want to teach relationship and the accountability that comes with relationship. You want to teach trust and mutual trust. And a lot of dads would be in there like, you know what? Look, if my kid is scared into doing the right thing, if my kid is scared of me and that's going to keep him away from drugs or other problematic behaviors, then what's the big deal? And one of those guys, through the program, like would start engaging in some of, he did try a different tact where he would actually talk to his kids and listen to them and be open to, and they became more and more likely to go to him. And one night he came into the class and he was really quiet. And I asked him, it was during our check-in, he said, something happened over the weekend. My daughter, who is 16, she called me from a party at like midnight and asked me to come pick her up. They were doing some drugs, and he's like, I went and I picked her up, and I asked her, why didn't she go along with what the other kids were doing? And he said, she didn't say, I knew if you found out, I'd get in so much trouble. She said, I knew if you were found out, how disappointed you'd be in me. And sometimes the knowledge is in the room and the class can teach itself, But I think that's the difference. It's that relationship built on accountability and mutual trust, and just being real, being authentic. I hope that answers your question, kind of.
Thank you, Jason. I think that's all we're going to have time for to allow people to get to their 1:00 meetings if they're on Central Time. But again, I cannot thank you enough for everything today. And if any other questions come up, you can send them to me or to Jason, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer them.
Please do.
And as I said, this is recorded, and I will make sure to send it out to people who attended and those who said they couldn't attend but reached out to me. So I think with that, just thank you, Jason, for everything. And everyone, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all. Thanks again for having me.